下面有请联合国教科文组织教育2030计划合作与协调司司长 Jordan Naidoo. Please welcome the Director of Division for Education 2030 Support and Coordination at UNESCO, Jordan Naidoo.
Thank you very much and good morning all. First, let me thank our hosts, China Development Research Foundation, Beijing Normal University, Tencent, GSV, New Oriental, and TAL for inviting UNESCO and myself to deliver this keynote, one of the keynote addresses. I would like to again thank all of the honorable leaders and distinguished guests for your attention this morning. It is a real honor and pleasure for me to provide an address on SDG 4 education and our common future. It is 4 years since the adoption of the Transforming Our World Education Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. The adoption of the SDGs was especially momentous for education as it brought to an end the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, and the Education for All goals, which had been going since 2000. The new education agenda encapsulated in the SDG 4, or Sustainable Development Goal 4, states that it is our duty to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. It is a goal that is holistic, ambitious, aspirational, and universal, and inspired by a vision of education that transforms the lives of individuals, communities, and societies. It is a vision that recognizes that education is influenced by reality, but also that it contributes significantly to that reality. The Sustainable Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goal 4 education, in particular, envisions transformed education systems to prepare young people for a future that demands new competencies and skills in an ever-changing and fast-changing global economic and socio-political environment. It is one that requires that we prepare students not only to participate in a world, but to shape their destinies and our collective destinies. In this context, the answers of the past and the present cannot provide solutions to the future, and especially a future that is quite obscure and fast-changing. Henceforth, individuals and societies will need to cope with demanding, critical, and most significantly, unfamiliar challenges. Therefore, education has not only to enable us to cope with, but also to transform that future. It is therefore necessary that education grooms global citizens, young and old, to think critically, creatively, and to act in the collective good. So we've heard also this morning a number of the speakers already refer to the changing future. I think what is really important in this new picture is the speed of change. It is difficult in this context to accurately predict and in a definitive form what futures might be emerging from the convergence of social and technological changes and what these other futures might mean for education. Within these uncertainties, one thing we do know is that technology is transforming and will continue to transform how and where we work, socialize, and interact with one another, bring up our children, engage in leisure activities, travel, treat our environment, and even for our health. Almost every aspect of our lives. As an example, I just want to describe a scene that's playing out in many cities across the globe. For example, at Amazon Go, a grocery store in Seattle, USA, a combination of artificial intelligence, motion cameras, and other technologies has eliminated the need for cashiers and lines. Customers scan their phones on entry, grab items off the shelf, and walk out the door. An itemized receipt, fully accurate down to the type of sandwich chosen, arrives by phone and is charged to the customer's Amazon Prime account. Such a scene is not a clip from a movie. It is a scene that is playing out in cities across the globe. Even the themes of this Global Education Summit is evidence that automation and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and new age digital technologies, as many have said, is not the future, it is now. They are already replacing low-wage jobs in farms and factories, and will soon make redundant even middle-income and high-income jobs as well, from Beijing to Johannesburg to Mexico City and New York. This has happened in the past, but the current technological revolution is quite different from the past. As Ravi Kumar, the president of Infosys, remarked, the sheer scale and accelerated pace of this one sets it apart. It is a tectonic shift in the way businesses and operating models have evolved in the past years. New technologies offer possibilities for new jobs and new ways of solving problems and for greater efficiencies. However, they also bring with them a number of serious challenges. Our collective future depends heavily on whether education from preschool through to primary and secondary and into adult professional training can adapt to a rapidly changing world and positively harness these possibilities. Despite the uncertainties that the future brings, policymakers and all stakeholders should embrace and direct new technologies such as artificial intelligence and others, adopting flexible policies, taking appropriate actions, and promoting national capabilities to innovate. On the part of UNESCO, we have launched a new initiative called the Futures of Education in a way to help the global community to address these global challenges. The Futures of Education initiative aims to generate global engagement and debates on learning and knowledge in relation to the multiple futures possible for humanity and the planet. To this end, UNESCO has established an international commission of eminent personalities and thought leaders from all over the world, from China to Brazil to many countries in Africa and Europe, including leaders of diverse expertise and perspectives from politics, academia, the arts, science, business, and education to lead the initiative. And most importantly, we've ensured that the Commission includes young people because they are not just the recipients of education, but should be fully involved in shaping their education. I just want to refer briefly, I've mentioned a few times SDG 4, Sustainable Development Goal 4, which focuses on education. I think it's important to look at the holistic nature of SDG 4. Agenda 2030 fully recognizes that it is imperative for education to be transformed and to be transformative. All people, irrespective of sex, age, race, or ethnicity, persons with disabilities, migrants, indigenous people, children and youth, and especially those in vulnerable situations, should have access to lifelong learning opportunities that help them to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to exploit opportunities and to participate fully in all aspects of life. That the focus of Sustainable Development Goal 4 goes beyond access is very important. we noted that with the Millennium Development Goals and MDG 2, we were largely concerned with ensuring that every child, every boy and girl and young person had access to education. One of the important shifts in the new agenda is the emphasis on quality. And I think not only on quality, but on the breadth of the SDG. In that, as pointed out this morning, it pays attention to the importance of investing in education early. And by early, I mean even before birth. And I think this is an important change in the agenda. So it covers all of the subsectors of education, from early childhood care and development through primary and secondary education, but also embracing technical and vocational and higher education. I want to pay particular attention to goal number, or target number 4.7, which says global citizenship and education for sustainable development. This is also a significant change in our focus within education. It pays explicit attention to global citizenship and education for sustainable development, and to peace and justice. And I think this is an important point of the education agenda, is that it is not only important for our cognitive development, but it is important for the future of planet, people, and for prosperity for all in a peaceful and equitable community. So one of the things I think it's important to recognize, while we look to the future and the possibilities that technology and other changes offer for transforming our world, we also have to consider the current situation. And unfortunately, I want to point out that across the world, the current situation globally is still very distressing. The recent UN General Assembly in New York in September, as well as the high-level political forum in July, which asked countries across the world to review progress on the Sustainable Development Goal, left a very distressing picture, not only for all 16 of the goals, or 17 goals, but in particular for education. We find, just to quote a few stats that really demonstrate that at the current rate of progress and on current trends, we are definitely off track. And if the world progresses at the current rate in education, we are unlikely to meet the goals of the Education 2030 Agenda for Education. For example, we still have 220 million children and youth who will be excluded from schooling in the year 2030. 1 in 3 young people will not complete secondary education, which we all know to a large extent is fundamentally essential for young people to be able to engage in productive economies, in stable societies, and for the sake of their families. There are many other shortcomings. One of the things that was the focus of the Millennium Development Goals was gender parity. And while we have achieved gender parity in access to primary education in many countries, Bangladesh is an example where they have improved to close to 100% gender parity in primary education. However, the situation in secondary and higher education is much to be left to be desired, and there's still much inequities. Other groups are excluded in many countries, whether on the basis of language, race, ethnicity, disability status, and so on. So equity is a real challenge. And as one of the earlier speakers pointed out, if we are to be true to the commitment of leaving no one behind, then we definitely need to change what we do and how we do it within education. Clearly, we have an education crisis. It is a crisis fueled by inequality and lack of quality, and one compounded in many countries by the lack of political will and inadequate financing. Furthermore, the crisis is compounded as children arrive unprepared to learn. Curricula are outdated. Far too many teachers lack the basic skills and competencies or motivation to teach effectively. Inputs often fail to reach classrooms or to affect learning. Poor management and governance often undermines schooling quality and outcomes. too many countries across the world are also affected by crises and conflict, which further puts pressure on education systems. Within this context, a further factor that affects the challenge is the fact that we live in an increasingly interconnected and interdependent world. And while those interconnections and interdependency can be and should be a positive for us to do change in a collective fashion, it often brings new levels of complexity, tensions, and paradoxes. A world of increasing uncertainty marked by migration and massive displacement, dangerous inequalities, and in many cases, rising extremism. This contribution to uncertainty, tensions, and paradoxes is added to by the rapid technological innovations that are changing labor markets and increasing environmental and political challenges, with the resulting demand for new skills and new knowledge for work, for citizenship, and for life in the 21st century. At the same time, prodigious technology is alluring all, kids and adults alike, to the digital world, and not necessarily always productively. Within this allure, exciting new learning modes are emerging for interaction of pedagogy and technology. However, the integration of technology in education is complex and for many quite an expensive process. These same prodigious opportunities, while they bring much potential for positive change, could also lead to significant hurdles and must need to be overcome, including taking account of certain ethical questions. Education under these circumstances has to be radically rethought. As Michael Fullan, who's often written on the transformation required in education systems, he said, we need to blow the lid of learning, whereby students and teachers as partners become captivated by education day in and day out. I think this is important. We truly need a transformation in education. In many countries, we still follow an education model that had been built to keep kids within classrooms as a means when their parents went to work at the start of the previous industrial revolution almost 200 years ago. And for many countries, that essential model has not changed much. Even though we've introduced technology, we've introduced much more flexible curricula, new processes and new practices. In many instances, we still have a teacher standing in front of a classroom with a chalkboard and about 50 to 100 students in front of him who he constantly lectures to. And this has to change if education is to be transformative. So let's look at some of the changes that we need to make. While daunting, the challenges are not insurmountable. The different reviews that we have undertaken over the past few years offer a few solutions. But to implement them successfully, we need greater political will, urgent action, and more resources that are to be used in an efficient manner. There needs to be radical changes in policy, but more importantly, in pedagogy and the practices of learning at all levels in order to deliver on the promises of the Sustainable Development Goals in and through education, and to enable all countries and every individual and every community to be better prepared for the future. For such a transformation in and through education to occur, we need to pay attention to many things, but I want to highlight 4 or 5 key things. The first thing we must do is to reorient teaching and learning to address the multiple dimensions of education. We need to ensure that students are equipped with the competencies and life skills to think critically, to work collaboratively, to respect diversity, and to develop mindsets to protect our planet and promote peace and justice. This will require qualified teachers to facilitate learning using new and immersive ways to explore curriculum in learning, flexible, technological, responsive learning environments to ensure learners acquire future-ready skills. Secondly, we need to ensure that we are truly committed to lifelong learning. Learning that allows us, as the previous speakers stated, to learn, to relearn, to unlearn, and to be prepared for the future. As already pointed out by a number of speakers, we have to invest in children early. This has to begin for all children, all families, even before birth, and needs to continue in a way that is sustained. We need to use technology in a way that is integrated to the process of learning. It should not just be seen as a silver bullet that is kind of the holy grail, but has to be connected to the process of learning. Lastly, I think what we have to recognize, it takes more resources. There is a 40 billion gap in education financing at the primary level alone. If we do not invest more, we have to meet the global targets of 4 to 6% of GDP and 15 to 20% of national budgets. At the same time, we have to draw on authentic partnerships. This conference itself demonstrates the power of partnership between government and private sector, between government and academics, between UN and other multilateral agencies. All of us are in this agenda together. We can only achieve it through collective action. Finally, I just have 2 points to make to end. I think what is really important is that we can talk, and this is what we've been doing for 4 years, but it is time for action. We need urgent action and acting together in a coordinated, focused manner, setting not only national priorities, but global priorities and working on them together in partnership. And I think this is important because we have to ensure that every child, young person, and adult has a much broader range of skills and competencies. Competencies that relate to citizenship, communication, critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, creativity, and imagination, among others. Finally, let me just end by saying that UNESCO is truly committed to the Sustainable Development Agenda. We remain true to the universal and ambitious nature of the Sustainable Development Agenda. Whether we focus on education, the economy, the environment, our collective action is necessary. So I think the Global Education Summit is really something that can contribute to that collective action to help us prioritize, but also to ensure that we are motivated to act together for the collective good. Thank you very much.
感谢 Mr. Jordan Naidoo 的精彩分享。Thank you, Mr. Jordan Naidoo.